Imagine dedicating like 4 entire decades of your life to mastering a life-saving craft.
Right.
You study through sleepless nights, you practice relentlessly, and you literally hold the hands of dying children, feeling their pulse slip away beneath your fingers.
It's an immense burden.
It is. And then, slowly, this terrifying realization creeps in. You realize that the very hospital you work for, the institution built to protect human life, is actually the thing causing the harm.
Yeah, that's a chilling moment.
And worse, when you meticulously document this and you point it out to the management, the system doesn't thank you.
Of course not.
Right? It doesn't fix the flaw. It turns its entire bureaucratic weight against you and systematically tries to destroy your life, your reputation, and I mean literally your mind.
It's the ultimate violation of the sacred contract between a healer and society.
Completely.
And, when a massive institution is confronted with its own lethal negligence, its first instinct is almost never reform.
No, it's self-preservation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Self-preservation through the total annihilation of the truth teller.
And that terrifying dynamic is the central mission of today's deep dive. We're trying to answer a really massive question today.
Let's hear it.
Why was Dr. Srivatsa different? And how does his incredibly turbulent life story reveal this bridge between 2 entirely different worlds?
You mean the generation born after World War II and the generation born after the year 2000?
Exactly. To really get to the bottom of this, we are looking at a truly staggering stack of documents today. I mean, it's huge.
It really is. We have excerpts from Dr. Srivatsa's own autobiography, including his reflections in a work called Maya Brings Tears of Happiness.
Yeah.
But we also have highly confidential NHS whistleblower legal files, raw clinical case logs from the UK, and the actual technical blueprints for his subsequent innovations.
Which are Dr. Maya AI and the Prima Kiosk, right?
That's right. And to frame all of this, because we really have to, we have texts detailing ancient Vedic philosophy alongside modern analyses of Carl Jung's psychology.
And we absolutely need those philosophical frameworks because, honestly, a standard medical resume just doesn't explain this story.
Not at all. A timeline of employment can't explain how a man survives the total destruction of his career.
Right, and then emerges not with some desire for vengeance, but with a piece of technology designed to save the very people who exiled him.
It's wild. So we are going to use the symbolic lenses of Carl Jung's archetypes alongside ancient Indian wisdom to really understand a man who acted as a true wounded healer.
Because when you look at the sheer scale of his conflict with the British medical establishment, standard bureaucratic language just falls completely short.
It really does. You need a vocabulary that understands myth and duty and deep psychological patterns to make sense of what happened to him.
And what he ultimately had to build to just bypass the system entirely.
Yeah.
So I want to start by dropping you, the listener, right into the geography and the sheer weight of his origins.
Let's do it.
Dr. Srivatsa was born in 1954 in India. But, he wasn't just born into a standard middle-class family.
No, he was born into the Katadiyali Upadi Brahmin priest lineage.
Right. We are talking about deep Orthodox roots here.
And the sources emphasize this lineage as a foundational key to his entire psychology. This is the Vishwamitra Gotra.
Can you unpack what that means for us?
Sure. So for over 600 years, his ancestors were intimately connected to the Uluru Kartikeya temple in Karnataka.
Wow, 600 years.
Yeah. They served as scholarly advisors, the Astama Vidwans to the Sringeri Mata. This isn't just some familial title they put on a plaque.
It's a duty.
Exactly. It is a hereditary, unbroken obligation to knowledge and spiritual truth.
And the specific deities of those temples are, they're incredibly telling for a boy who would eventually become a critical care physician.
Oh, absolutely. Kartikeya in the Hindu pantheon is the divine physician. He is literally the destroyer of diseases and demons.
And the family is also tied to a Nagadevada temple, right?
Yes, which represents the ancient wisdom of poisons and their antidotes.
It is hard to read these documents and not feel like his medical destiny was somehow pre-coded into his ancestral DNA.
It really feels that way. Yet, despite being surrounded by this rich, bustling cultural heritage, his early childhood is marked by a profound, almost eerie sense of isolation.
Yeah, the autobiography notes that he was nursed by his mother for less than a year.
And why is that? Because his younger brother was born soon after.
Right.
And the texts say this younger brother cried constantly, just demanding every single ounce of the parents' attention.
So young Srivatsa Essentially learns the earliest lesson of his life, which is do not be a burden.
Right. If the system, and in this case, his family unit is the system, if it's overwhelmed, you must disappear and just manage yourself.
He grows up so deeply independent. Instead of demanding his mother's attention, he actually bonds with animals.
He finds a puppy, right?
Yeah. He spends his formative years observing the silent, nonverbal communication of pets rather than engaging in the chaotic noise of human siblings.
And his mother even praised him for this. She told him he was the best child because he never complained.
But psychologically, this is the very beginning of a pattern, isn't it?
Yes, he is learning how to operate outside the collective. And there is a really pivotal moment detailed in the text that happens when he is just 10 years old.
The thread ceremony.
Exactly. It revolves around his upanayanam, which is this sacred thread ceremony that initiates a young boy into the formal study of the Vedas.
Let's set that scene for a second. He has just gone through this profound religious rite of passage. He's wearing the sacred thread.
And his grandfather, a man who acts as the guardian of this collection of fragile 11th century scripts, he pulls this 10-year-old boy aside.
And he doesn't give him like a complex theological lecture.
No, he looks at him and says one very specific, very simple sentence.
Must not throw stones at dogs.
Must not throw stones at dogs.
Which, to a Western ear,
Yeah.
That might just sound like standard grandparent advice. Like, hey, be nice to pets.
Right. But in the context of a 600-year-old Brahmin lineage, this is a formal initiation into the concept of ahimsa.
Ahimsa.
Yes. Ahimsa is the ancient Indian principle of universal compassion and nonviolence.
So it's not just about the dog.
Not at all. His grandfather was instilling the idea that inflicting pain on any living creature, no matter how, quote-unquote, insignificant that creature seems to society, it disrupts the fundamental cosmic order.
So it's this incredibly localized, highly personal translation of a massive cosmic law.
Exactly. He is planting the very first seed of Srivatsa's future medical ethics.
But this profound internal life, this heavy ancestral duty, it also made him an absolute outsider among his peers.
Oh, without a doubt.
The autobiography describes him walking into a standard school wearing a bindi on his forehead, mudras, which are these sacred marks on his temples, and the sacred thread visible on his chest.
I mean, you can imagine how that went over with a classroom full of ordinary kids.
He was an immediate target.
The visible markers of his Brahmin priest's identity just made him a magnet for teasing and bullying.
They branded him as a naughty boy, right? A rebel who just refused to conform to the sanitized, secular expectations of the classroom.
And he didn't fight back by trying to fit in. He actually doubled down on his isolation.
Yeah, he struggled academically with the standardized curriculum, actively ignoring his teachers.
But he channeled all that focus into mastering calligraphy.
Which is such a specific thing to rebel with.
It is. He became so remarkably skilled at it that the school headmaster actually commanded him to write a quote from the book, "So Said Gandhi," on a display board at the school entrance every single day.
If we pull out the Jungian framework here, what we are observing in these childhood anecdotes is, well, it's the painful early stage of individuation.
Let's put some meat on the bones of that concept for the listener. What does individuation actually look like in practice?
Right. Individuation is Carl Jung's term for the agonizing psychological process of separating yourself from the collective.
It's the journey of becoming your true, unique self. The self with a capital S.
Rather than just adopting the persona.
Exactly. The persona is basically the mask society demands you wear.
And the collective, whether that's your schoolmates, your family, or later on your professional colleagues, they always demand conformity.
They want you to blend in because blending in is safe. It's predictable.
So by showing up to school with ancient mudras on his face and choosing the company of a stray puppy over his own family and obsessing over the precise art of calligraphy instead of his math homework.
He is actively refusing the persona.
Right. He is activating the outsider archetype.
He is building the psychological muscle required to stand completely alone against the crowd.
I look at it like he was building a psychological immune system.
That's a great way to phrase it.
He was undergoing exposure therapy for social rejection. I mean, if you can survive being mocked by your entire school at age 10 for wearing your sacred truth on your forehead, you are inadvertently training yourself for the future.
For the moment, decades later, when the entire British medical establishment tries to mock you into submission.
That is a perfect analogy. And this outsider status, it actually mutates into another, much more dangerous archetype as he finally enters the clinical front lines.
The prophet. Or what psychologists refer to as the Cassandra complex.
For those who might not remember their Greek mythology, Cassandra was the priestess who was given the gift of prophecy. She could see the future perfectly.
But she was simultaneously cursed by Apollo so that no one would ever believe her warnings.
It is just a curse of maddening isolation.
And that curse descends on Srivatsa shortly after he becomes a doctor.
Though initially medical school is a triumph for him.
Yeah, he actually flips his social script for a moment. He becomes quite popular.
His peers call him Bobby Vatsa, right?
Yes, because he zips around on a motorbike, kind of mirroring the famous 1973 Bollywood movie Bobby.
He has charisma, he has drive. But the moment he steps out of the idealized halls of the academy and into actual general practice, the illusion just shatters.
The sources really outline his first collision with the shadow of the medical profession here.
He starts working and immediately sees the dirty underbelly of medical commerce.
He documents laboratories handing out under-the-table commissions for referrals.
He sees hospitals operating not as sanctuaries of healing, but as aggressive commercial ventures.
He watches doctors profiting directly off ordering unnecessary diagnostic tests.
So the idealism of the divine physician, that Karthikeya archetype he carries in his blood, is slamming headfirst into the reality of a profit-driven healthcare market.
But the true turning point, the defining, shattering trauma of his clinical career, it doesn't happen over a financial dispute.
No, it happens at the bedside.
Let's look at the actual clinical case logs provided in the sources.
He describes a 14-year-old boy, perfectly healthy, strong teenager who comes into the hospital for a relatively routine issue.
Srivatsa is there as the attending physician, and suddenly the boy develops sepsis.
And the pathogen is Staphylococcus aureus.
And we really need to explain the medical irony of that specific bacteria to understand why this was so devastating.
Yeah, let's unpack that.
Staphylococcus aureus is not some exotic, rare jungle pathogen. It is a commensal organism.
Meaning it lives on us right now.
Yes. Roughly 30% of the human population carries Staph aureus in their nose or on their skin at any given moment, completely harmlessly.
It's just part of our natural flora.
But when it breaches the skin barrier and enters the bloodstream, it becomes an absolute killer.
And modern medicine's answer to that is antibiotics. I mean, it's the miracle of the 20th century.
But in this boy's case, the miracle fails.
The antibiotics do absolutely nothing.
Because the bacteria has mutated.
Yeah.
It is resistant.
The documents describe Dr. Srivatsa literally holding this 14-year-old boy's hand as his organs shut down and he dies.
The texts note how profoundly this single event broke him.
It wasn't just a sad day at work. He spent sleepless nights in a state of terror.
He writes about being afraid to even walk back into the hospital. He couldn't look the boy's parents in the eye because he had no explanation for them.
The foundational promise of modern medicine, that a pill will save you from an infection, had proven to be a lie.
It was an existential shock to his entire operating system.
And this trauma acts as the catalyst for his prophetic vision. We are talking about the late 1980s and early 1990s here.
Almost 35 years before antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, became a mainstream talking point at the World Health Organization.
Srivatsa is out there screaming from the rooftops about superbugs.
And he isn't just warning about the bugs themselves, he is pointing the finger at the very mechanics of modern hospital care.
Right, he explicitly links the spread of these resistant superbugs to common everyday medical procedures.
Specifically endotracheal intubation, which is putting a breathing tube down a patient's throat.
And intravenous cannulation, which is inserting an IV line into a vein.
I really want to unpack the mechanics of this because it's vital to understanding why his colleagues hated him for saying it.
Yeah, how does an IV line cause a superbug pandemic?
It comes down to biofilms. When you insert a piece of synthetic plastic, like a cannula or a breathing tube, into the human body, bacteria like Staph aureus love to attach to that foreign surface.
Okay, that makes sense.
Once attached, they secrete a slimy, glue-like substance called a biofilm.
And this biofilm acts like an impenetrable fortress.
Exactly. Antibiotics circulating in the blood often cannot penetrate the biofilm.
Wow.
Furthermore, inside that fortress, the bacteria can easily swap genetic material with each other, basically sharing the blueprints for antibiotic resistance.
So, Srivatsa realizes that the hospital itself, by jamming plastic tubes into every patient that walks through the door, is inadvertently creating heavily fortified breeding grounds for superbugs.
He sees that the tools designed to save lives are actually acting as superhighways for lethal, untreatable infections.
And this is where the Cassandra curse fully materializes.
Because exposing an uncomfortable structural truth too early is incredibly dangerous sociology.
When you confront a massive institution with a terrifying truth like the impending failure of their most basic tools, you activate institutional inertia.
The collective establishment simply does not want to hear that its foundational miracle is collapsing.
They resist the paradigm shift because accepting it would require changing everything about how they operate.
The prophet invariably invites the wrath of the collective shadow.
Which pulls us right into the darkest chapter of this story. We move forward to the early 2000s.
Dr. Srivatsa is now a highly experienced pediatrician and critical care physician.
He is working as a general practitioner in the UK's National Health Service, specifically under the authority of the Surrey Primary Care Trust, or PCT.
The environment he walked into was essentially a powder keg waiting for a match.
The UK government at that time was heavily pushing a new bureaucratic initiative. They were rolling out pilot nurse-led practices and walking clinics across the country.
On paper, if you are a politician, this sounds fantastic.
Right. The public relations pitch is, we are increasing patient access, reducing wait times, and saving the taxpayer money.
But the clinical reality, as heavily documented in the whistleblower legal files we are reviewing, was a total nightmare.
To hit these arbitrary political targets, the clinics were utilizing administrative staff receptionists, essentially, and nurses to autonomously triage, diagnose, and prescribe medications to patients.
And they were doing this often with zero direct supervision from a fully qualified medical doctor.
They were playing incredibly fast and loose with human lives just to satisfy a spreadsheet.
And you have Srivatsa, a man carrying the massive analog clinical intuition born from decades of high-stakes critical care, watching this unfold.
He is horrified. He isn't just theorizing about danger. He is seeing the aftermath.
The logs show patients returning to his clinic with severe missed complications because an administrative worker sent them home with painkillers when they actually had a severe underlying pathology.
The environment in the clinic became overwhelmingly toxic.
Srivatsa, activating that truth-teller archetype we talked about, refuses to just grumble about it in the break room like everyone else.
He starts meticulously documenting every single clinical error.
He begins filing formal, legally protected whistleblower disclosures under the Public Interest Disclosure Act.
And this friction generates one of the most astonishing internal documents in our source stack, the Tamil Tiger Memo from January 2009.
Srivatsa writes a multi-page letter to the practice manager, and reading it, it feels like a dispatch from a literal war zone.
He documents a complete breakdown of professional ethics.
He details administrative staff verbally attacking him in the hallways.
He outlines how management has entirely abandoned their basic duty of care to the patients.
In one striking passage, he compares an incredibly abusive, volatile interaction with a patient to negotiating with a Tamil tiger.
Which is a reference to the fierce militant group in Sri Lanka.
It just highlights his utter sense of being under siege, abandoned by his commanders, left to hold the line entirely alone in a hostile environment.
I have to stop and ask the million-dollar question here, pulling from the sociological analysis in our sources.
What's that?
Why did his contemporaries resist him so violently? I mean, if I am a hospital administrator and a doctor with 30 years of experience brings me undeniable clinical data proving that patients are being misdiagnosed and harmed, why is my reaction to destroy the doctor instead of fixing the deadly flaw? Is it just a pure financial calculation?
Money is the surface layer, yes. But the sources point to a much deeper, much more insidious psychological defense mechanism.
Okay.
Think about the implications. If the Surrey PCT leadership officially acknowledged Srivatsa's evidence, they would be legally admitting that their flagship, highly publicized, cost-cutting experiment was a negligent, dangerous failure.
Which instantly opens the trust up to millions, potentially tens of millions of pounds in medical malpractice lawsuits from harmed patients.
Exactly. But beyond the money, it is a catastrophic threat to their authority.
The people running these trusts are often non-cynical managers, right?
Their entire professional identity is tied to hitting operational targets.
Srivatsa represents the old-school, doctor-centric model of medicine, where clinical judgment outweighs bureaucratic efficiency.
So by blowing the whistle, he isn't just pointing out a medical error. He is challenging their right to rule. To protect their egos and the institutional hierarchy, the whistleblower cannot simply be fired. He must be mythologized.
He must be made to look crazy so that his data can be dismissed.
You see this in corporate settings all the time. When you go to HR with a systemic problem, you suddenly become a quote-unquote culture fit issue.
But here, the stakes are literally life and death, and the retaliation is unimaginably brutal.
They weaponize the sheer mass of the British bureaucracy against him. This activates the exile archetype.
The legal files outline this agonizing loop. They subject him to 7 overlapping, concurrent inquiries.
Imagine the psychological toll of that. 7 different tribunals, panels, and investigations demanding paperwork, interrogations, and defensive posturing.
All while you're still trying to practice medicine.
They tried to drown him in process.
But when the bureaucratic drowning didn't force him to quit, they deployed the most insidious, morally repugnant tactic available to an institution.
The documents explicitly state that conspirators within the clinic facilitated the circulation of fabricated sexual allegations against him.
They spread rumors that he was behaving inappropriately with female patients behind closed doors.
And we have to pause and deeply contextualize this, because if you read the autobiographical sources, the psychological violence of this specific lie is devastating.
You have to remember who Srivatsa is at his core. He is not just a doctor.
He is a Katyali Upadhyaya Brahmin priest.
Right. And as a priest in that lineage, he was raised with an intense, foundational spiritual discipline regarding gender and sexuality.
He was taught to practice absolute restraint, to interact with women with the utmost dignity and detachment.
To never gaze at or touch a woman in a way that lacked profound respect.
So for his enemies to take his deepest spiritual integrity, invert it, and twist it into a weapon to label him a predator.
It wasn't just a career attack, it was a spiritual mutilation.
The documents reveal how profoundly this damaged him. He writes that he stopped trusting women entirely.
He isolated himself emotionally and physically, terrified that any interaction could be weaponized.
And the stress of this isolation ultimately contributed heavily to the breakdown of his marriage and his divorce.
It is the ultimate shadow tactic. By manufacturing these allegations, the institution wasn't just trying to get him fired.
They were trying to completely annihilate his moral standing in the community.
And as a final nail in the coffin, they ordered a mandatory psychiatric evaluation.
They wanted a doctor on paper to label him paranoid, delusional, or unstable.
Because if the whistleblower is crazy, the institution is safe.
But this is where the universe, or the truth, pushes back. The psychiatric evaluation backfired spectacularly on the PCT.
I love this detail. Tell us what happened.
The independent psychiatrist sat down with Srivatsa, evaluated him thoroughly, and wrote a report concluding that Dr. Srivatsa was perfectly sane.
Incredible.
In fact, the psychiatrist turned the lens back on the institution, stating that it was the clinic environment that was incredibly toxic.
And that forcing Srivatsa to return to that environment would be severely detrimental to his health.
The institution itself was the pathology, not the doctor.
But a massive bureaucracy rarely admits defeat. They just look for a colder legal loophole.
And they found one. On May 1st, 2011, the government executed a maneuver using 2PE.
2PE, what does that even stand for?
The Transfer of Undertakings, Protection of Employment Regulations.
I need to understand how this works because it sounds protective in theory, right?
It is, generally.
Yeah.
TUPE regulations are designed to protect employees when a public service is privatized.
So if the government sells a clinic to a private company, your contract transfers over so you don't lose your job.
Exactly. But how did they use it as a weapon? They used it to forcibly transfer Srivatsa's employment contract and, crucially, all the legal liabilities of his ongoing whistleblower case.
Oh, wow.
To a newly formed private entity called Practice Surgeries Ltd.
Wait, I'm struggling to see how this ruins him. Why does it matter who signs his paycheck?
Because a massive government entity like the NHS has infinite taxpayer resources to drag out legal battles, but they also have public accountability. By transferring his contract to a small private company, they effectively outsourced the lawsuit.
That is devious.
Once Srivatsa was under Practice Surgeries Ltd., that private company could claim financial hardship, restructure, or simply starve him of shifts and resources in a way the NHS couldn't publicly justify.
They amputated him from the public system.
After decades of saving lives, this legal maneuver left him destitute. He lost his home.
He was left trying to survive on a meager pension of just £500 a month.
He was officially entirely exiled.
The machine won. They broke him. He returns to India.
He has lost his career, his family structure, his home, his finances, and his reputation.
He writes in his autobiography, Tears of Happiness, in a moment of agonizing doubt, questioning his own sanity. Am I a fool to throw away a career, a family, and a home?
And this brings us to the crux of the narrative. How does a human mind survive that level of total systemic annihilation without collapsing into absolute nihilism or taking their own life?
He does what his 10-year-old self did. He taps into the spiritual architecture of his lineage.
And this is where the source texts draw a breathtaking, almost cinematic parallel to the ancient Vedic myth of sage Vishwamitra.
It is a vital symbolic lens for understanding his survival.
The story of Vishwamitra and Menaka is one of the most famous and complex narratives in Hindu lore. Let's really look at this myth.
Okay, walk us through it.
Vishwamitra was originally a king, a man of immense worldly power, but he renounces his throne, his wealth, and his status to become a sage.
His goal is to achieve ultimate spiritual perfection, the exalted status of a brahmarshi.
And to do this, he engages in tapasya.
Which is?
Tapasya is not just meditation. It is rigid, flawless, unimaginable spiritual austerity.
It involves suppressing all physical desires, standing in the elements for years, eating only air.
It generates a literal metaphysical heat tapas. Vishwamitra practices this for thousands of years.
He becomes so intensely powerful, his focus so terrifyingly rigid that the gods themselves, particularly Indra, the king of heaven, grow terrified that Vishwamitra's power will consume the universe.
So Indra realizes he has to break this man's concentration.
He sends a celestial nymph, an apsara named Menaka, down to the forest where Vishwamitra is meditating.
Menaka dances. The wind blows her garments, and for the first time in millennia, the great sage opens his eyes and feels desire.
His concentration cracks. He reaches for her.
In an instant, thousands of years of rigid, flawless discipline are shattered into dust.
Now, in many surface-level readings, this is seen as a tragic failure of willpower.
But the true, deeper meaning of the myth, and the reason it applies to Srivatsa, is about what happens after the fall.
Vishwamitra and Menaka conceive a child, a daughter named Shakuntala.
And as Vishwamitra holds this newborn infant in his arms, something profound happens.
He experiences a feeling that his thousands of years of rigid, isolated perfection could never, ever give him.
He feels vulnerability.
Exactly. He feels human love. He feels the joy of simply being a part of the messy human experience, rather than striving to transcend it.
His rigid pursuit of perfection had to be violently broken so that he could discover true empathy.
Let's map this directly onto Dr. Srivatsa, because the synchronicity is just unbelievable.
Look at Srivatsa's life in the UK. He was practicing his own intense form of medical tapasya.
He was rigidly, flawlessly pursuing justice.
He was trying to force a corrupt, unyielding NHS bureaucracy to be perfect, to put patient safety above all else, to heed his prophecies about superbugs.
He was fighting an agonizing, decade-long war of attrition, running on pure, rigid ethical stamina.
And the NHS, the corrupt institution itself, acts as his Menaka.
The institution broke his rigid concentration.
The retaliation, the false sexual allegations, the 2PE transfer, the financial ruin, it completely destroyed his pursuit of medical perfection within the system.
It forced him out of his meditative state and cast him into the wilderness of exile.
But just like Vishwamitra, in the ashes of that exile, Srivatsa finds his Shakuntala.
The destruction of his career forces a complete surrender of his professional ego.
And this allows him to deeply understand human vulnerability. It leads directly to a profound, transformative connection with his own daughter, Ashwini, who was born in 2002.
The sources explicitly state that Ashwini became the light that reminded him what truth actually feels like.
He spent his time watching her. He watched how she intuitively connected with people, how she operated without the heavy, rigid baggage of institutional trauma.
Watching his daughter taught this master physician that healing wasn't just about rigid medical protocols or fighting tribunals or having the perfect diagnostic data.
Healing is about coherence. It is about empathy. It is about deeply listening to the human being in front of you.
This realization brings us to a core philosophical conflict documented in the sources.
Srivatsa starts building his innovations in this exile, but he explicitly, forcefully states in his writings that his work, his technology, is not a charity.
This is a crucial distinction rooted in ancient Indian wisdom, and we need to understand it to understand his motivation.
Let's explore that.
I'm going to push back here, or just play devil's advocate for you, the listener. If a doctor loses his career, gets financially ruined, and still decides to spend his remaining years inventing a free health kiosk to save humanity from superbugs, that is the literal dictionary definition of charity. Why is he so insistent on rejecting that label? It feels like we are just splitting philosophical hairs.
It isn't splitting hairs, though. It is a fundamentally different operating system for the human soul.
Oh, so?
Let's look at it sociologically. Charity, in the modern Western sense, often implies a power dynamic. It is the wealthy giving to the poor.
Okay, I see that.
It is often ego-driven. It's done for tax breaks, for social status, or simply to feel good about oneself. It implies that the giver is superior to the receiver.
So what is his framework?
His framework is Dharma, specifically Swadharma, which is personal duty, and Nishkama karma.
Nishkama karma.
Nishkama karma is a central tenet of the Bhagavad Gita. It means taking action without any attachment to the fruits of that action.
You do not do it for a reward, for fame, for money, or even for gratitude.
Exactly. You do the work because it is your cosmic duty to uphold the balance of the universe, a concept called utta.
So he isn't giving humanity a gift. He is paying a debt to the universe.
Yes. Srivatsa views the doctor-centric, profit-driven, fear-based healthcare system that destroyed him not merely as inefficient, but as a dharma. A fundamental spiritual imbalance, a profound injustice. He writes that he is acting out of lokasamgraha, which translates to world maintenance.
World maintenance, that is a heavy phrase.
He didn't build his AI to be a charitable tax write-off. He built it because it was his duty to restore order, to protect the vulnerable from the poison of systemic greed.
Just like his ancestral deity Kartikeya slays demons, Srivatsa must slay the demon of medical ignorance.
He does the work because the work must be done, completely, regardless of whether he dies destitute or becomes famous from it.
That mindset is the only way you survive losing everything.
Absolutely.
If he were doing it for charity, for gratitude, the bitterness of the NHS betrayal would have poisoned him.
By shifting to Nishkama karma, the betrayal becomes irrelevant. The duty remains.
Which leads us to the physical manifestation of that duty. To fulfill this dharma, Srivatsa had to figure out how to translate his decades of lived analog wisdom into a language the future could actually understand.
He had to become a bridge between his generation and his daughter's generation.
Let's really analyze that generational gap, because the source documents lean heavily on this dichotomy. Srivatsa belongs to the generation born between 1945 and 1965. This is the post-war generation.
What are the psychological markers of that group?
The text described them as a generation shaped by scarcity. They were deeply embedded in a respect for institutions, governments, hospitals, universities.
They were heavily disciplined, taught to keep their heads down and do their duty.
But most importantly for Srivatsa, they carry massive amounts of lived analog experience.
Srivatsa spent 40 years literally touching patients, feeling the specific heat of a fever,
Listening to the subtle crackle of fluid in a lung through a stethoscope.
smelling the distinct sweet odor of certain infections in the air of a hospital room. He carries the art of history taking deeply in his bones.
Now contrast that with his daughter Ashwini's generation, the post-2000 generation.
They are fundamentally different.
They are digitally fluent, raised with screens from birth. They are highly intuitive, open about mental health, and critically, they are entirely free from the old institutional conditioning.
Exactly. A 20-year-old today does not automatically trust a hospital or a government agency just because it has a big marble building and an official crest.
They have seen institutions lie, fail, and crash the economy.
They expect information to be democratized, transparent, and instantly accessible.
But Srivatsa, looking at the future of medicine, saw a terrifying problem.
The analog wisdom of his generation, the deep human ability to sit with a patient, look them in the eye, read their body language, and truly listen to the narrative of their illness, was dying.
Modern medicine, driven by the very metrics that ruined him in Surrey, was forcing junior doctors into what the texts call a sterile gaze.
The sterile gaze, it's a chilling phrase.
It means doctors are no longer looking at the patient. They are staring at pre-printed assessment sheets on computer screens.
They are ticking boxes in an electronic health record. They are treating the data points, not the human being sitting on the exam table.
Srivatsa realized that if the post-2000 generation was going to survive the impending collapse of antibiotics, the superbug crisis he prophesied, they desperately needed the analog wisdom of the past.
But they needed it delivered through the digital fluency of their future. He had to become the bridge.
And that bridge is his technological masterwork, Dr. Maya AI and the Prima Kiosk.
I look at this technology like this. Imagine a master craftsman, a legendary blacksmith or watchmaker, realizing that he is mortal.
Right.
And worse, realizing that the guilds designed to teach the next generation have become entirely corrupt.
So he decides to painstakingly download his entire analog brain, all his intuition, into a digital vessel.
So that the apprentices of tomorrow can learn the truth without ever having to step foot inside the corrupt guild.
That is precisely what Dr. Maya GPT is designed to be. It is vital to understand that it is not an algorithm designed to diagnose you and prescribe you pills.
That is the old, broken, doctor-centric model.
Dr. Maya is a color-coded symptom logic system. It doesn't tell you what to do. It teaches you how to map your own symptoms.
Okay, but I have to push back here. Earlier, we talked about how healing requires empathy, the smell of the room, the human connection.
Right.
AI is inherently sterile. It is literally just ones and zeros. How do you code the analog soul of a 60-year-old Brahmin critical care physician into a machine?
Isn't an AI doctor just the ultimate version of the sterile gaze he was fighting against?
That is the ultimate paradox, and it is exactly what Srivatsa had to solve.
He didn't just build a standard chatbot. He structured Dr. Maya around what the sources call the Hippocratic Trinity.
He broke the act of healing into 3 distinct parts to ensure the machine augmented humanity rather than replacing it.
Let's unpack the mechanics of this trinity.
First, you have the intuitive healer. This represents the human element, the patient themselves, or a caregiver.
This is inspired by his daughter Ashwini.
The AI relies on the human's bodily intuition, asking them how they feel, respecting their subjective experience.
Second, you have the scientific sage. That is Srivatsa's downloaded brain.
It is the decades of hard clinical data, the deep knowledge of pathology, microbiology, and disease progression.
And then the third.
The conscious intelligence. That is Dr. Maya AI itself.
It acts as the digital memory that never fatigues, never judges you, never gets angry, like the staff in the Surrey PCT.
And crucially, never sells you fear to make a profit. It takes the human intuition and filters it through the scientific sage's data.
And this philosophical framework physically manifests in the real world through the Prima kiosk.
PRIMA stands for Personal Resource Emergency Medical Advice.
The documents describe it as the modern technological successor to the old public telephone booth. It is a solar-powered, multilingual healthcare ATM.
Let's make this concrete for the listener. Imagine it's 2:00 a.m., you are a young parent, your child wakes up with a fever and a rash.
Under the current system, you are seized by fear.
You rush your child to an overwhelmed, chaotic emergency room, a place teeming with the very superbugs Srivatsa warned about.
You wait for 6 hours. A stressed doctor gives you a hurried glance, maybe prescribes an antibiotic just to clear the queue, and sends you home.
Which contributes directly to the AMR pandemic.
Exactly. Now imagine the Prima alternative. You walk down the street to a glowing, solar-powered kiosk.
You interface with Dr. Maya. You input the symptoms. The AI uses Srivatsa's deep, color-coded logic to triage the situation.
It calmly asks the right questions to differentiate between a minor viral illness, which needs rest and hydration, and a genuine bacterial emergency.
It removes the panic. And by removing the panic, it stops the patient from demanding unnecessary antibiotics.
It empowers the patient directly, cutting the profit-driven gatekeepers entirely out of the equation.
It is the ultimate circumvention of the bureaucracy that destroyed his career. He is literally giving the power of triage back to the village.
It is the digitization of Dharma. He coded his ethics, his empathy, and his triage logic into a machine precisely because the human institutions had lost their conscience.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult question we have to assess based on these documents.
Has Dr. Srivatsa actually succeeded? Has he fulfilled his sacred contract?
Because if we look at the window right now, the outer reality is that Dr. Maya and Prima kiosks are not on every street corner.
The global medical establishment is still dragging its feet, still furiously protecting its massive, highly profitable, doctor-centric disease management industry.
To assess his success, we have to clearly distinguish between the outer material reality and the inner spiritual reality.
From a purely institutional standpoint, the public implementation is absolutely incomplete.
The adoption of his innovation is facing the exact same institutional inertia, the exact same profit protection mechanisms that destroyed his career in the NHS.
Follow the money. A system that generates billions of dollars off of sick, fearful people is not going to readily adopt a free, solar-powered kiosk that empowers people to stay home and drink fluids.
Precisely. However, from the perspective of his sacred contract, his inner duty, the sources suggest the mission is entirely complete.
Look at what he achieved. He completed the brutal intellectual work. He recorded the analog knowledge before it was lost.
He designed the complex algorithms.
Most importantly, he survived the crucible of total institutional destruction without losing his mind, his ethics, or his soul.
He successfully translated the ancient wisdom of his Brahmin lineage into a digital format that will survive long after he is gone.
His personal spiritual responsibility is fulfilled.
The legal documents also highlight his catalytic influence. Even if the Surrey PCT didn't instantly reform itself and adopt his ideas, his very existence acted as a massive irritant to the system.
He was a mirror. By forcing them to fight him, he forced the NHS to legally document its own corruption in thousands of pages of tribunal files.
He forced the truth into the light. He proved unequivocally that these massive systems are fragile, paranoid, and blinded by their own self-preservation.
And now his final act of locus hongraha world maintenance is letting go.
He has built the lifeboat. He has stocked it with the navigation tools of the past.
But it is not his job to drag everyone onto it.
It is up to the post-2000 generation, the digital natives, unburdened by loyalty to broken institutions, to actually step into the boat and row.
It is just a staggering narrative arc. Let's synthesize this journey.
Dr. Kadiyali Srivatsa started as a deeply independent child, learning nonviolence from ancient scripts.
He grew into a rebellious medical student zipping around on a motorbike.
He evolved into a deeply wounded healer, a prophet who foresaw a microbiological apocalypse, and a whistleblower who lost everything fighting a corrupt, self-preserving bureaucracy.
And in the ashes of that absolute exile, much like sage Vishwamitra, he surrendered his ego, reconnected with the intuitive love of his daughter, and transformed into a visionary.
He literally translated the ancient spiritual concept of Dharma into a digital code designed to save humanity from its own greed.
It is a profound testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a terrifying warning about the nature of the institutions we blindly trust.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over today.
We started by talking about the blind faith we put in hospitals and bureaucracies. You've probably felt this in your own life, whether it's dealing with a corporate HR department that claims to protect you but throws you under the bus, or a government agency that treats you like a number.
We assume massive institutions operate with precision and care.
But if the very systems meant to protect human life are ultimately blinded by their own self-preservation, ego, and profit, what if the future of human survival relies on something entirely different?
What if our safety doesn't rely on giant marble-floored hospitals, but on the decentralized, incorruptible empathy we code into our machines?
And the ancient truths of compassion that we are brave enough to pass down to our children?
It's a question that demands we fundamentally rethink where our true safety lies.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Take care of yourselves, question the systems around you, and we will see you next time.